Hello, I'm Stuart Preston, and this is the Stoned Ape Reports, where I have conversations with those who have changed their lives with the help of psychedelics. In this episode, I had the honor of speaking with Rebecca. She shares her story of overcoming the deep depression following the birth of her son. She did it working with Iboga, peyote, and ayahuasca, who continues to bring her messages. So let's hear from Rebecca. Rebecca, first of all, thank you so much for coming and spending your time with me here on the Stoned Ape Reports. I'm glad to have you. We've interacted a little bit in some of the groups out there. So first of all, thank you for doing this.
Yes, absolutely. I love doing this.
Excellent. So as we discussed, what I like to do is go through and kind of hear your story. You know, what was going on in your life, good, bad, indifferent, whatever it was that kind of made you realize either consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously, that you needed to change something. And how did you end up, with the medicine, with psychedelics, and what were those experiences like? And then what is life like today? So let's start with kind of what was going on in life, before the psychedelics.
I was going through a major depression, actually. I have experienced depression on and off throughout my life. And this time it was just like the rock bottom type, where not getting out of bed, I became reclusive. It was, and I had a young son. So after I gave birth to him, I became very sick. And this is well beyond, what they call post-partum. It was just, it was devastating. I couldn't even function in ways, everyday ways, so it was a problem. And I was motivated, though. I'd go through periods where I was helpless, feeling hopeless and all of those things. But, at one point, I think that I was just so desperate that I did reach out in my mind, to whatever spiritual or other level of consciousness that might be listening to ask for help. And that's really when things started to change.
And how did you reach out, and what was the response? How did that work out?
I just did in my mind one night. I was not only depressed, but I was also researching for a documentary that I was making and getting into really, a dark, deep politics, and it was scary, and I felt really kind of unhinged by it all. It was awful. And having your head in that place for a long period of time. I mean, if you're not depressed, there must be something wrong. So, and I think that I came across some random strange reference that somebody talked about being targeted, and that how they dealt with it was that. And so I thought, okay, if there's no, and in my opinion, at that time on Earth, there was just no remedy. And so, so you have to go off the Earth for, and I had no appreciation for spirituality, really. I was brought up a Catholic, and I just knew, like, I rejected that at the age of 7 officially. In my mind, I knew this was not for me. I loved the idea of Jesus, but everything else surrounding it was just not for me. I questioned it. I knew that, and for me, the big thing was that, he sounds great. Why isn't everybody behaving like him? Why is nobody behaving anything like him? This was in Catholic school, right?
Right.
And it seems like that was the story they gave you, but it was a big bait and switch, right? They give you the story, and then what was going on around you was just like mayhem and aggression and just terribly bad behavior. So that was a strange link in my mind. Spirituality equals all these contradictions, right?
Oh, yeah, interesting.
So years later, there I was reaching out, and unlike, my previous experience of spirituality, I did know that there was these alternative ways of looking at this. It never really appealed to me, but, philosophy did. So I was fairly open-minded. And at that point, it was desperation that was really driving it. And so I just reached out and said, hey, if there's anyone or anything out there, I need help. Please help, and after that, I just started to stumble across these ways of getting out of the situations that I was in that was causing so much harm. So one of them was the medications that I was on that I hated, and I didn't want to be on them. They weren't effective, clearly, and there was this horrible feeling of being so kind of enslaved by them. They were difficult to get off. They are difficult to get off.
Yeah.
And the way that it happened for me was very unusual. I tried to before, and when I tried to get off these depression medications before, I started to think, wow, I wonder if this is what heroin addicts experience when they try to get off, because it was horrible, and I'd do anything to stop it, and I'd get back on it, and you'd feel like you're, imprisoned by it. So one day, after reaching out in my mind, I just came across a documentary, and it was all about nutritional supplements. It wasn't really about this, but they did cover, some supplements that were good for depression. And strangely enough, and I don't recommend this really, but for me, it worked. I went cold turkey. Like overnight, I ended my medications and started the next day on really high levels of certain supplements that were recommended for depression. I had no side effects. This is unheard of.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was one thing that happened. And then I read somewhere about energy healing. And again, like these are things that in the past I would have just like completely not been open to. But suddenly, desperation can really open you up pretty quickly. And there I was, I went and met with this guy, and this energy healing was very unusual. He stood across the room from me and just sent energy my way, and my body just started moving in all these strange ways. And I learned how to get out of the way and let it just happen, which was I never did anything like that before. And the very idea that was happening and I was witnessing it and experiencing it was to me, such a profound thing that I had to understand, how's this going on, right? So I went back and put my research, cap on and started to dig and discovered that energy healing had its roots in shamanism. So then I pursued shamanism, thought, okay, I have to learn about that. And these were the kinds of traits that I used in my documentary research that I started to apply to getting me well, and which was great. Switching gears like that was just absolutely, and I dropped all of that because I realized that was just harming me. I dropped the research, I dropped the documentary project, and just focused on getting well, because suddenly I realized this was possible. There were things out there that I just didn't know about, and all I had to do was dig and pursue. And so I did. I found, I started, studying shamanism with this organization that was, very reputable. And we did workshops where you actually, start doing the work right away instead of theoretical, which was perfect for me because I'm terrible with the theoretical stuff. I want to actually do it,
Yeah.
But I couldn't journey. Like this is the basis of shamanism, is connecting with this other level of consciousness, and I wasn't able to do it. And I'm not terribly surprised now looking back. I was on medications for so long that really, locked things up, that opening up was going to take some effort. So we were, but I could, the divination stuff came remarkably easy, and I was still in this state of like open curiosity. I didn't decide I have to believe this is true or I don't believe it. I was just in this open, curious state of, I don't know any of this stuff. I'm just willing to experience what I experience. And I was very surprised at the things that happened. And by the end of that first workshop, I was like, hey, I said to this guy who was teaching, like, I can't do this. You're asking me now to go and journey on behalf of another person. And I haven't been able to do it myself. So he decided to step in and do that on my behalf. And this exercise that we were doing at that time was connecting me with my helping spirit. It was interesting because, again, I didn't believe in any of these things, but I did not believe. They were completely beyond my experience. And I didn't care about any of it. I just wanted to get well. and if this was where it led me, great, I was going to go for it.
And at this point, are we talking about psychedelics at all, or is this a still kind of energy work?
Not yet. This was all because a lot of these medicines we have learned, have their history in shamanism. And this was pure journeying, working with our own level of consciousness and changing it with sonic drumming and intention and with the help of these allies that we come to know through medicines, but they're already there, and some people have been working with them for some time. So the instructor is a shamanistic practitioner who already was working with these, whatever you want to call it, spirits, levels of consciousness, entities, angels, whatever appeals to you, right? It's just our looking at it that's the difference, right? And so then you have access to work with them. But again, I'd been medicated for so long, it just took a while. And I remember I was having so much difficulty at one point. I said to him, look, nothing's happening. We lie down and you take us, you recommend we take this journey in our mind and start with this imagery. I can't even do that, and he's looking me in the eye and he's saying, so nothing happened, absolute blackness, nothing. And I started to shrug, and he said, what happened there? Why were you shrugging? I said, well, at one point I kind of, feel like I may have been in the stars. And he just says, there you go, that's it. And I'm like, well, everybody else is describing all these natural, idyllic places. And I didn't think that, and he goes, and for you, it's the stars, which really surprised me. And it did happen. It's just that because my mind was so unaccustomed to any of this, it almost edited it out. It almost said, that couldn't be. But when he asked me and prodded, I remembered and it came back, and it really did happen. But we do tend to reject these things sometimes when we have no frame of reference to it whatsoever, right?
Right.
So it does take a while to get through those attitudes and preconceived notions in our mind and what's possible. So in the end, he did this whole shamanic procedure where he connected me with a helping spirit in the form of a bird. And I actually, when he was performing it, my chest got lighter and I just had this sense of fluttering. But I again, I just kind of said, okay, that may have happened, kind of thing.
Right.
And then we went into one final journey. And this time, not only did I have some visuals, and this is, again, blindfolded with your eyes closed, very similar to some of these, medicine journeys. And I heard the sound of a bird, and I shot up and sat up immediately and whipped off my my blindfold and looked around the room, and I was trying to find a logical explanation for what I was hearing. I actually looked at people's feet to see if they were wearing shoes that might have squeaked together, the rubber. It was crazy how much my mind really needed to be able to explain this away in some logical way, But people were in their stocking feet, and there was nobody wearing that kind of rubber that could have created that sound. Like it wasn't a thing. And so I thought, okay, this is interesting. And I walked away dazed and confused and wasn't quite sure what took place, really. But then at night, I was still, wanting to continue to heal this depression, knowing that even though I started to feel a lightening of things, that there was work to do. So at night, my only frame of reference to spirituality was praying at night, something you could do without going to a church, which I was no big fan of. And so there I was at night going to bed, and I reached out in my mind to this spiritual entity, helper, or whatever, and said, hey, if you're there, and then I'd sort of ask a question, and my dreams started to change, and I could tell that there was this attempt to communicate with me. There was my dreams, I could tell that they were, showing me things, and there was a lot of symbolism, and I started to look that up. What does a baby owl mean? And then the next night I would say, okay, so I'm kind of in my baby stage of gaining this wisdom. Is that right? And I'd get a response, and at one point, I remember going to sleep, and it was like a full conversation. I'd say things like, okay, so last night I got some ideas, but, I'd really like to get more clarity and understand more, what you're trying to say to me. And then I had a dream that had all subtitles.
Really?
Yeah, but I couldn't read them. But I knew they were there, and it made me laugh because I just thought, they have a pretty good sense of humor. There was a whole character behind this presence, whatever it was. And I would get these insights throughout the day when I would think about what I perceived as problems at the time, what I was struggling with. And I would get these insights, but they weren't like a full-on voice. It was just these concepts would arrive in my mind, these kind of downloads of, understanding humanity better and understanding our difficulties and understanding the harshness of the experience that we're having. And, at one point I'm like, oh my God, humanity's horrible. I hate humanity, And the response was no, that's not appropriate, and not helpful and not accurate really, And then it just continued to unfold that we need to be more loving, and it's okay that we're growing into it, and all of that. But there wasn't a verbal dialogue. It was more like my curiosity and then a downloaded concept, But it was like that. There was a relationship developing there, and then so I knew I was still struggling with depression, but I was seeing that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, and I was starting to move through this growing stage, and just started to continue to do research and explore about alternative methodologies, and came across Iboga. And so one night, again, as was my practice now, before I went to sleep, I'd ask, so is this for me? And I got this, and this happened a lot too, is as I was falling asleep, when my eyes were closed in that theta state just before full-on sleep, I'd get visuals when my eyes were closed, and the visual that came was first I got this great, spectacular psychedelic show. It was colorful and animated and beautiful, like, every gorgeous piece of art from the 60s, all animated and moving and changing, and it was just so beautiful. And then right after that, I saw a very serious close-up of blades of green grass. And at that time, it was like the dead of winter. And so this was the answer to my 2-part question: is Iboga for me, and when will I do it? And I did not like the second part. The first part felt like, yes, it's for me. But the second part was, you're going to have to wait till spring. And I'm like, I decided to misinterpret that. And I tried like hell for months to make this happen. All went so spectacularly wrong time and time again, until finally I almost gave up. And then suddenly I found this place that I hadn't seen before that just felt much better than the other options I was considering. And boom, everything fell into place just after, the snow finally disappeared. That was the longest winter. And as everything was falling together, I noticed that, for the first time, there was green grass outside, Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was my first introduction to psychedelics. Was Iboga, was like this big one, but it was good because I needed it. It was very good for depression, to just like really shake you out of that deep, dark state. And also I had really come to understand in the months preceding that it really was all about me understanding, focusing on myself and changing my own attitudes and ideas, and just continuing to focus there. It wasn't about the world. It wasn't about anything or anybody else. It was about me. And so that was good training for Iboga. Excellent training.
Good. Is that so? Your very first experience was with Iboga?
Yes, it was. Yeah. I mean, other than
quite an introduction to psychedelics.
Yes. Thank God for the shamanic training leading up to that, because it was so important, because it's quite, that's quite a powerful teacher. And it really does strip you naked. It shows you yourself, and there's no looking away. And it can be very ugly. Like they're not there to pussyfoot around. They're there to really even shock you into putting your attention where it needs to be. And that certainly happened. And so I saw a lot of that. I saw a lot of like it's a very busy experience, Iboga. You see like just all these things coming at you. It's very weird because you're not sure what to do and what to focus on. People in your life sometimes show up. I had no clue what to do, why, the significance.
Were there people there guiding you or assisting you or anything?
They were there, but this was less assisted, and I've had experiences since that were more guided, but there's long periods where you're left on your own. And it seems like I wasn't intended to really go that route, even though there are certain protocols, such as there's part of the experience that traditionally they take you through. They take you to your house. They take you to your ancestors. All these things. It failed both times with me, but I had my own experience, right? So part of the protocol at one point is to find your home in your mind, and you have to kind of search your mind, and then you have a visual of it, and then you have to find certain people in your life and have this guided experience. For me, it never went that way. I would go into a home, and then suddenly I'm like flying through all these hallways of all these different homes. And they're like, what's happening? I'm like, I'm flying through all these hallways. And this guide says, don't go through a door. And I'm like, oh my God, I was flying toward the end of this hallway at high speed, and it had an opening at the end. And it was really interesting though, because at the very end of that hallway, immediately in response to what my guide told me not to do, shutters appeared to say, hey, don't worry, it's not a door. You can go through it.
Interesting.
And like it's a very interactive thing. So I shot through that, and I ended up in the stars.
Wow.
Again. And it was actually a beautiful experience. It felt like home. It felt very nice. My idea of the stars growing up and as an adult was a very physical thing. Like, wow, it must be so cold. And, it was very charming to look at them from, at the night, and very romantic and everything. But the idea of being up there, I was associated with machinery and rockets and, spacecraft. And I was never the type of person that would go for sci-fi films or anything like that. So it surprised me a great deal that this theme kept revealing itself in these ways.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and then at one point, many things happened, obviously, jarring things, but I did trust and know that there were reasons for it, and that I would work it out eventually. And I had a sense that I was connecting with this, whatever you want to call it, this spirit of, Iboga. And in fact, he showed up. So this figure appeared, and I knew it was him. I knew it was, what people refer to as Iboga, because sometimes these they show up, as you know, right? And so he did, and he was this like crazy little character he looked like something from a children's book, but animated, with all these little cutout pieces together to make a comical little face and funny little character. And I knew it was him, and it was almost like, in The Wizard of Oz, this guy coming from behind the curtain, and I didn't, and because he'd showed me all these horrible things, I didn't know whether to pummel him or hug him, but there I was with these conflicted feelings, and he was being so silly, and it was good because it lightens you up. Like, it's all very intentional. So after that, it was a big experience. And
it sounds like it. Did it? How did you feel in terms of your depression or stuff that was going on in your life? Did you come out of the Iboga experience with some changes or some insights, anything like that to work on at that point?
It was brilliant. Yeah. One thing about Iboga is that for a lot of us, it gives us this absolute like quantum leap into good feelings, especially when you haven't had them for so long. And it would buoy me up to the point where I could do things that, I went from having difficulty getting out of bed to like the top 5 stressors in the average person's life. Separating from my partner, selling my home, putting my child into finding a new one on my own, the breakup, finding a new school for my child and putting him into school for the first time. Like all of these major events happened within 6 months of this experience. And I was able to do that,
Wow. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. So that's a pretty big change. But of course, after all that, I was pretty, it used up all of that energy that I was given. And I knew it was time to explore other options, other medicines. And so I looked for ayahuasca. I was going to Mexico on a spiritual retreat, and not to do with medicines, but to go to Teotihuacan and explore, the pyramids there and things like that.
Yeah.
And so at the same time, I thought, well, I'm in Mexico. I may as well explore ayahuasca options there. There are tons. But at the time, I couldn't find any. And there's a reason for that. And I started to trust it, I remember that, when it came to Iboga and me trying to force it before it was, ready to happen, that it was just kind of a waste of energy. And I thought, I have very little of that now, so I'm going to use it well. And I did stumble across peyote instead. And I thought, okay, this is what I'm meant to do. And that was a really dark experience. It was very scary. Yeah, for me, it was very dark and very scary, but it was necessary. It was one of those things that, had to happen to just move me beyond something. There have been a couple of key experiences that have had to do with moving beyond this harsh intellectual barrier that I had, Yeah. And it was it was causing all kinds of problems, and I really had to deal with it. They were just like, you have to get over this if you want to achieve the things that, your intentions reflect. And one of my big intentions there was to tap into that personal power. From the very beginning, my questions were all about how do I, deal with this or that, especially depression, or, solve this problem. And the answers were always, everything you need is in you, It's like, that's great. Show me how to tap into that,
Yeah.
And that became my intention for everything, it was always that. And so it always went really deep and into this core stuff that was preventing me from really opening up. And so it was a very dark experience. I was almost enticed into this intellectual discussion with the facilitator. And I you really think you're getting somewhere, you really think you're on, and it's just going in these big circles. And there was almost like, a mocking effect of this darkness I was descending into, where it was showing me that, it's a very impressive circle and it goes absolutely nowhere. It just brings you right back to where you began. And it's, it's not helping you. And then I descended into, a hell-like state. Like it was just so dark and empty, cold. And
that's scary.
Yeah, it was. But, I woke up the next day and I just knew that something important had happened, and I wasn't feeling victimized or any of those things. I was just really, I knew something really important was going on there. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you know what it was, or did it take more medicine journeys to find that out?
I think that, and there's levels of this knowing too, right? Like, part of me knew it, but I hadn't really quite, I didn't need to know it all. I just felt it. And later, when I had another experience about shedding yet another layer of this attachment to, intellectualizing things, that was just such a full release that it was like, oh, thank God I got rid of that. That was an ayahuasca one where I just threw up all night. everybody like in the ceremony came to me the next morning going, "Oh, poor you." And I'm like, "No, you have no idea how good that felt. Like that just felt so good. Like that so had to happen." And the next day I'm just like, I feel like $1 million compared. I mean, I was exhausted, but I said, no, I was happy for every single time that happened.
Every purge had some good effect.
Oh, it felt so good to get rid of all that crap. That was great. Yeah. But that was kind of like, over like a couple of years later, because after peyote, I came home, and then ayahuasca was ready for me. These things I just got a sense of. And there were some really interesting, very magical things going on between all of these experiences, like this kind of guidance that I had, with the shamanic stuff, just kept on going. I'd close my eyes at night and I'd get visuals, and they'd just be always leading me where I needed to go. And I remember before that peyote ceremony, part of the ritual was you offer something up, some token that you're offering to this medicine. And in my mind, instantly, I knew it had to be this jade crystal I had at home. And jade crystal I bought on a chain, and it was for dowsing, because I wanted answers. And I saw someone else use it, and I thought, yeah, let's do that. And it never worked for me, and I just didn't feel comfortable with it. And but I knew it was in my backpack, and I thought, oh, great. Or I thought I did. And I almost tore it apart, and it wasn't there. And then this thought came to me that I had to bury it. And I'm like, all righty. It's not here, but I know I got to bury it. Meanwhile, the facilitator is saying, it doesn't matter. Here, buy something in the town from the crafts people who live here, all peyote related artisans, it'll be great. So I did that. I bought this lovely, bracelet. I thought contributing to the economy of this place I feel good about that. That's great. Went up to the mountain, and I put it in my backpack. Went up the mountain, and the ceremony is about to begin, and it was nowhere to be found. Yeah. And it's because this presence kept saying to me, look, what needs to be done. It's this crystal, you got it at home, you need to bury it. All this other stuff, sure, we'll just, things will just happen the way they do. You're going to be prevented from going along with what other people are telling you so that you can know that these thoughts that you're having, these downloads, are actually really true. They're important, So the facilitator said, look here, I'll just give you this, and this will be your thing. But in my mind, I knew what it was and what I had to do. And so then I flew home eventually after all that, started doing some auto writing then too. Like I'd be woken in the middle of the night and started to auto write. And it was very interesting what was coming out, all helping me sort through a lot of the concerns I had about the world after doing all that, deep investigations for the documentary that was never made. And it was really good. It was really helpful. It was so helpful because these things did plague me, and part of my depression, sure, and I'm sure it always has been. Like I'm learning now that there's, we're all very unique, and there was a reason why I've been concerned about the state of things in a larger sense in the world for, since I was a child. It's not everybody's thing, but for me it was. And
yeah.
That's why some of these healings had something to do with that. And anyway, I flew home, and I couldn't bury this damn crystal because it was the mid of winter again. The ground was frozen. But I started to look for ayahuasca retreats, and I found I actually consulted with another documentary filmmaker who made a very famous film, the Soul of the Vine, or the Vine of the Soul. I can't remember which. I always get those two mixed up. But anyway, he recommended 3 places, and one of them was the Temple of the Way of Light. And so I went there and had a magnificent experience. Like I've always loved the jungle, the idea of it. I don't know why. A lot of people are afraid of it, but ever since I was a kid, like I just fascinated with the idea. even though my mom was like terrified of it, told me stories about army ants attacking people. Like this couple she knew went there, and they went to go to the bathroom in like in the jungle, and these army ants attacked them, and all I could think of was, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, she's like, this is horrible. And for me, it was like, no, this is an adventure I have to have. And well, I mean, not the army ants, thank God, but just being there in that environment. And sure enough, when I arrived in this place in Peru and deep in the jungle, I just felt like it was alive, and it was welcoming me and embracing me. And I'm not the only one. I've heard other people talk about this, where everything around you, it feels like it's just, drawing you in, and it felt like home. It felt so much like home.
Wow.
Yeah. And I felt so much at home that I even wanted to go barefoot. Like immediately I had this desire to take off my shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I resisted because my brain was kicking in saying, no, you can't do that. That's, rah, rah, rah. That brain, that part of myself that I know that I've learned to ignore more and more, and then just dissolve. But it's funny because, the ants did show up in my story too, because the next morning they took over my shoes, and so I couldn't wear them.
Really?
Yeah. So they gave me permission basically to go, barefoot for 3 days, and just feeling, that soft jungle floor. It was beautiful. I just loved it. I was felt so, yeah. And in my first ceremony, ayahuasca showed up, and she was like this big, magnificent looking insect. And she embraced me, and she said, "You're one of us." And her torso was all this shapibo kene, like the that design that they weave into all of their cloth and all of their art, and it was moving. And so I focused on one part of it, and it changed as I focused on it. And it seemed to me to kind of indicate that the power of the mind, that we do have an impact on those things that we're focusing on, and that that where our focus is and what we're thinking about. And so, yeah. And it was such an intimate experience. Every ceremony was terribly personal and intimate, and they were just seemed to be, welcoming me, teaching, healing, and indicating that I would be working in that arena. And I was very nervous about that idea because I was such a novice, and I said so in my mind. Like this dialogue kicked in right away, and it was very like you and I talking, but they were using, of course, my inner voice, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so at one point I said, can you use a voice outside of me? Because I seem to still need to be convinced that this was not just me making stuff up,
Right.
I mean, we go through these levels where we just need, confirmation, or we try these little tricks to convince ourselves more or test it out. Anyway, this was one of the things that I tried, and the voice came back saying, and it's always from the position of we. So it seems to be this collective that's communicating with me. And they said, we have to use your voice. It's a good one. Use it well.
That's a lesson.
Yeah. Oh, well, this has come up a lot. Like even with Iboga, one of my big questions was, and with Iboga, you're asked to ask questions. So this is very much a part of that ritual. And so one of my questions was, what is my purpose? And the answer came in the form of 2 microphones, hanging in front of me. And one of them was this, round universal, microphone. And the other one was an oblong one. And then, and I went back into ceremony with Iboga and actually asked the questions, how do I use my voice to serve my purpose? It's almost this endless need of confirmation, right? And then the same microphones, presented themselves, and the round one said, yeah. And the round one said, speak. And the oblong one said, sing. So this using my voice thing is a constant, and it's taken me a while because of, how I grew up and not feeling like I had a voice as much when I was younger, and almost feeling like sometimes when I used it, it could, put me in danger. And it's just the general atmosphere. And I was the youngest, so you know how these hierarchy of families work, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes. So, and I was very intimidated by the idea. So it's taken a lot of work. It still does. As you know, I have a podcast, so, and I've been just.
So you talk.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I finally got around to doing it, but I'll tell you, it took a lot of haranguing on the part of this voice. So this voice, when they indicated to me, you'll be doing this work. I reacted with, I don't know anything. I'm just a novice, and they said, don't worry, we'll come with you. And so it was like, oh, okay. And then after this retreat was over and I flew home to Toronto, the ground was no longer frozen, and I buried the crystal, and this voice kicked in at home, this dialogue. And it's continued from that day.
So tell me about, what is that dialogue? So that with the ayahuasca spirits, they continue to speak with you?
Yes, they do all the time. Yeah.
And are they giving you lessons? I mean, when they speak to you, what are they saying? What's going on there?
Constantly lessons.
Wow. Yeah.
At the beginning, it was a little overwhelming. It was wonderful. I mean, I thought I'd won the lottery, It was, I remember the very first thing that happened was I was in the shower and I was looking at my feet. And I remember one of the facilitators in the retreat commented on the fact that I went barefoot, saying, that's so healthy and so amazing. Do you know that we have more pores in our feet than anywhere else in our body? And I went, oh, wow, that's interesting. Filed it away. Fast forward, I'm at home in the shower, looking at my feet, thinking of this and wondering about it. And this voice kicks in saying, that's how they knew how to get home. And they were talking about, early indigenous ancestors that navigated their world in that way.
Interesting. And they conveyed that history lesson to you.
Yes. So that was the introduction. It's like, oh God, they're there.
Yeah. Wow, that's quite an introduction. And now they're there regularly. Are they helping you? So I guess my question from that whole experience, I mean, from the Iboga and the dark peyote to the ayahuasca, like one big journey. How have you come out the other end? I know ayahuasca is still with you and still talking to you, but as you look at your life today, obviously you found some purpose with your voice and you're exercising that purpose. How do you feel when you look at today versus back with that deep depression you were experiencing?
It's impossible to really kind of relate to it. It's not as though
it's like a whole different person.
It is. And it's not as though I don't have periods where I feel down. I certainly do,
Right.
And it's just the things that I've experienced since then and understand and know, and the responsibility that I have to myself, that's a whole, that was big. And I think that's another thing that is really changing us. And when I mean us, it's like, this is going to have the biggest impact on society, I believe, because it shifts the responsibility from everybody else to us. And all these medicines support that.
And when you say to us, what do you mean by us?
I mean, as individuals, we have a responsibility to ourselves to change our lives. And I think that, there's been the way that we look at things, the way that we're taught things from a very young age about how life works and, who's responsible for what in our lives. There's not this focus on our responsibility to ourselves.
Yeah.
There's not this focus on self-love and understanding and exploring ourselves and all these things. We learn about everything externally and we don't learn a damn thing about ourselves. We're not even encouraged to, really. And that is so utterly fundamental to our well-being. And I think we're starting to get that now. Oh, wow. That's important. you know? So this is going to change us as a species. This is going to change humanity completely.
When you say it's going to change us, that sounds like a very optimistic view of where we're going with psychedelics' role in
Oh,
our, in
yeah.
our in our lives?
It's exploding. It's
Yeah.
exploding because of the same reasons I did and you and many others. We find ourselves in situations where we can't cope because we haven't had that grounding. We haven't been oriented towards understanding ourselves, how to be with ourselves in healthy ways, how to be with others in healthy ways. We're falling apart, seriously, big time. And that has to happen. So my depression had to happen so that I could heal. I had to see how badly things were not working so that I could be motivated to make them work.
Interesting. So it had to happen to bring you essentially to psychedelics, to the medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been brought to my knees on many levels ever since. And I see the same pattern. It's like, I get it. I got to see how absolutely this is not working so that I can choose to go in a different direction.
Yeah.
So even though I have this voice, it doesn't mean I don't continue to learn by experience.
Yes. So life still happens.
Yes. Oh, totally. For sure. And this is the lesson that you can know something intellectually, but to apply it is really where the rubber hits the road. And that's a process, and it takes time. And these lessons are going to happen in ways that we might not always like, but they're very effective, and we're all having a very customized experience. This life, it is the ceremony.
Life is the ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And as we go through, we drink the medicines or eat the medicines or whatever, and it helps us get that grounding, get grounded to earth, and understand the self-love, and really teaches us those lessons if we open up to it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's huge too, because we are creating our experience. So if we shut that down, then we don't have access to it,
Yeah.
and we make those decisions all the time without knowing it, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I have a couple questions about medicines and psychedelics in general. Before I get to that, did you have anything else along this path, and this story so far that you wanted to get to and get out?
I'd like to open something up because, in our earlier discussion, you had mentioned that you had an experience with ayahuasca where she came to you and said, "I am you." And I had intimate experience where ayahuasca came as a collective saying, "You are one of us." Mm-hmm. And then most recently, in early 2020, I returned to Peru, and then this voice said, "You are our daughter." So and I just wanted to, kind of say that everybody's going to have their own experience of this. It's not laying some claim to some lofty thing. We are all so much more than what we imagine ourselves to be in this life. So we all have a larger existence and consciousness beyond this little experience that seems pretty big to us. And it's very mysterious, and ego plays no role there. And trying to fathom it with our minds the way they are is a difficult thing, and trying to house it in the concepts that we tend to invest in a great deal in this life, like hierarchies and who's better than who, it's not going to work. And it's just going to actually, really dim that experience and turn it into something it is not.
Yeah, it's ironic. We see a lot of that in the psychedelic community, a lot of ego. Yeah. Ironically, it's I think one of the most ironic things you see out there is ego death, massive dose, and it's just like, buddy, that's your ego is talking.
Well, yeah, and here's the thing, like I hate using that word, and the reason why I don't like to use the word ego is because we all think of it in different ways, and there's very different ideas of what that may be. Another thing is that there's a lot of people who go into the experience and they really need to understand how their ego is interfering in ways in their lives. Like with me, it was the intellectualism. But in other ways, I needed to really invest heavily in my own sense of self and really feel better about that. And it actually, pump up my ego a little bit. So there was a balancing act that I had to do. And other people who had other problems and had to, tone it down, might perceive my experience from their own standpoint and think, oh, wow. And this is where we fall apart, where we're trying to apply our own lessons to someone else. It's not always valid. And most of the time it's completely way off. We are so unique. And what, our path with these medicines is highly, highly customized. And really the best use of our energy is to focus on ourselves and our own path, not what that guy's doing, whether he should or shouldn't be doing it, or that woman, whatever. It's us. In fact, when we start to feel that way, pay attention to why, start to explore that. So why am I feeling that person should do this? Why am I jealous or upset or angry or whatever? Those are important triggers. Feelings are, when you start to follow that, you learn a lot about yourself. And that's what you really want to do because you're the one experiencing this life, right?
Yeah, the feelings of discomfort, confusion, anger, or could be a sign to something that you're learning or need to learn.
Yeah, and you don't need to wallow in it. Like, just open curiosity is like my best recommendation. I remember before I went to Peru again this time, I was just feeling this deep confusion, and it started to feel very sad and heavy. And I reached out into my mind to this voice and just said, I'm really genuinely so confused. And they're saying, well, don't stay there. Ask us then. If you're confused, ask us.
Yeah.
I don't get away with anything.
Yeah, it seems like, oh, okay. That was easy. Just ask.
Yeah. And the thing is that I had to recognize that I'm not always ready, because this could be like a 24-hour thing. And it is. Like I go into my dream and it doesn't end, right? And I drive it all. So I can't really blame that on anyone. I don't want to. I know that I'm driving it. It does take a lot of mental energy during the day and night to do this. And there are times I need to just take a breather, go, okay, I'll try not to wallow in my confusion and just get on with my day. And when I'm ready to ask that question that's going to address that confusion, I'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's part of the whole process of learning about yourself and finding that place to love yourself.
Sure. Yeah.
Giving yourself that space.
And like magical things are possible. We experience this all the time. And there's a tendency to really attribute these things to that pill that you take or that substance or whatever. But time and time again, and I'm not the only one that experiences this, many of us, before we even ingest a thing, we have these really magical experiences outside of ingesting anything. And I'm having them all the time, but there was like a series of them at the beginning that, started to acclimatize me to that experience. But the more, again, we open up to this possibility, it's astounding what we can achieve and accomplish in our lifetime and what we can experience and what's possible with these relationships we're developing with these spiritual allies.
Wow, that's beautiful. So somebody's out there listening to this. I mean, you dove in head first, starting with Iboga. If somebody's out there and is dealing with depression, having hard times, whatever their challenge is, what general advice would you give somebody who may be feeling the draw to these medicines?
When we say do research, it is true that it's helpful, but also follow how you're feeling. So don't let your head take over. There are times when you can see, all these people say this great thing about this one medicine, but there's something inside of you going, just not really warming up to the idea. And then there's other times where, you might find something else and you'll like start to connect with your feelings. I know it's hard when you're depressed and all disconnected and everything, but it'll happen. And open up. That's the most important thing, is to open up to what is right for you, because it's different for everyone. So this one sort of thing applies to all. It's just, we're starting to get that that's just really unhealthy. And and kind of abusive, you know, and not respecting how truly and beautifully individual we all are. And you know, you'll find your way, you know, create that intention, open up, and you know, and this is a difficult thing, but you know, try to use your energy in that direction and not in the direction of poor me and I'm suffering, and that repeating that over and over again. Start to use as much energy as you have, even if it's very little, to towards the search for the answer. And believe me, I say this with full compassion, because I was that person who was very devoted to, oh my God, everything's wrong, you know. It took a long time and effort to not do that so much. And it's, you know, I achieve it in varying degrees, right? You know, we all still have to work at it.
Right. Sure do. You're very open about this. You know, we met online, and I know you've got the Ayahuasca Talks podcast. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
So in being open and out there and discussing these things, have you felt any pushback from people in your family, friends, the business community, that is kind of a demonstration of, you know, some of the stigma that is still out there on psychedelics?
You know, it's surprisingly been not that bad. So as you know, I've had this sort of continuing connection, dialogue, teaching, and it took a lot of urging for me to do this, to come out. And before I did the radio show, which became the podcast, I gave a big, long talk and basically shared a lot of the things that I just shared with you, some with them anyway. But the general, you know, journey. And I was just in a state of like absolute panic and just did not want to do this, and was back in this like, no, don't make me, you know, you can't make me do this. Just horrified at the idea of launching into this, going so public, like, you know, and planning it all myself, you know, so booking the hall, promoting, you know, writing the talk and giving it, and letting ayahuasca have the last panel of my talk and my presentation, and just dictating what it's saying to me. And it was just, it all seemed like a horrible nightmare. It's like, I was just so not wanting to do it.
Really?
And this, it was horrible. I was terrified. Like I had stage fright, the whole business. I knew, and that's what's kept me from singing. You know, and it does. It wants to force you outside of your comfort zone. And boy, was that ever outside. And anyway, one night.
Well, good for you.
And well, they did help. So one night they gave me this heart opening experience. Again, outside of the medicine, I experienced this beautiful heart opening. And all I could think of was, everybody wants to feel this. There's not a person on this planet that doesn't want to feel this way. And it was so beautiful. And all I could say was, please let me feel just a teeny bit of this when I'm on that stage, you know. And it ended up doing like really well. Some things went wrong. There were filming hiccups, and someone had to use a handheld cam, you know, to film it. But it worked out so well. And then, which made the next part not as hard, you know, the whole radio show thing. But I was guided all along the way. Yeah, you got to do this, you know, like it felt like, you know, that bird being forced out of the nest. So
well, that's spectacular. I wonder what ayahuasca has in store for you next. I wonder what lessons they're going to come and deliver to you next. Well,
because I've been so vocal about my experience, that has a lot to do with, you know, tapping into this guidance. So many people have come to me, you know, not only about depression, but about tapping into that inner wisdom. And I actively went about trying to discover what kind of tool that I could offer people that respected the whole shamanic process, you know, the shamanic wisdom that teaches us that we do have the answers inside of us, and give ourselves some more credit, and discover that power within, which has been the ongoing theme from the beginning for me, teaching about, you do have it in you. And, you know, interestingly enough, I stumbled across hypnosis, and originally worked with someone else to help people, you know, re-experiencing ayahuasca and other altered states through it. Um, and then I went and studied it and started to, augment it to help people to journey into, we can do this without medicines. We can continue that work and honor the experiences we've had by, discovering how they connect with us. It wouldn't be possible if we couldn't do it on our own, and we can. And so people do, and they've been having like all kinds of interesting insights and breakthroughs. And it's amazing when I work with people and they discover that they do have these answers within them. And that's what I do. I help people not only, with hypnosis and integration, but just with personal growth and healing. And
Wow.
I just using hypnosis. But the medicines really want me to continue to speak. And I think the next level is going to be to allow this voice that speaks to me to come out and speak to everybody else.
Nice. I love it. Well, I can't wait to hear what you have to say. You've had so many good things to say, here today. I love the hypnosis thing because it's something that has been ringing around my mind, is tapping into that level of understanding and consciousness without the medicine. Because you hear stories, for anybody who reads about Ram Dass, you read about his story and giving a vial of LSD to his guru and it having zero effect on him. And you hear stories of other people getting to this space without medicine. And I think you said something really key, is that if it wasn't there for us to access, then the medicine wouldn't help us, and because it does help us, it must be available to us in other ways. So the fact that you found it with hypnosis is just incredible.
Yeah, same is true of knowledge and wisdom. It wouldn't ring true to us if we didn't have that in us to make that connection. That's how we know it's true. We feel it, and we start to respect our feelings and our abilities so much more through these medicines. And they're very hot on this topic of what we're capable of with me and many others. This just seems to be, we all have our themes, and we all have our unique personalities, and they use that in really beautiful ways. And when I started to auto write, they asked me actually in many ceremonies, put pencil to paper and do this, really, we want you to. And then, and the stories started coming out, like, beyond auto writing, it was like they were dictating a story to me. And I put it up on my website, Story of the Keys. It's all under the category of ayahuasca wisdom. Because I started to, share with people what these dialogues were like and the things they were telling me. And then finally they took over and said, okay, this is what, it was almost like, this is the answer to every question you're ever asking. You guys all have the power, and here's how it is. But it comes through in a voice that's not my own. You can see my writing on my website and what it's like. And then you can see this, and it's this old medicine voice that talks in metaphors about keys, meaning our power, and how we give it away, and what we can do with it. And it's not me,
Yeah.
It's them. Yeah.
Wow. And the website is RebeccaHayden.com.
It is. And there's a very small bit of this writing on there, the Story of the Keys. I'm still writing it. I need to get back to it and finish it up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, awesome. I'll definitely put a link to that. A lot of good stuff there. So anything else, you wanted to get out there before we wrap up?
I wanted to ask you about, now you had shared this story with me about your son passing and about you pursuing psychedelics to heal this. And my question for you, because I've dealt with people who are grieving, and I've had my own experiences. My father passed, and for me, and I think many others, we're starting to see that veil between people who seemingly die and the experience we're having is not as firm as we perceive it. And I'm wondering, did you ever have in the medicines a connection with your son and feel like you were with him again?
No. It's a complicated answer because there have been close calls. There was a time with mushrooms when I felt him coming, and I described it as like a light coming from an infinite point away. And when he was coming to me, I felt overwhelmed and I said, I'm not ready. And as soon as I said, I'm not ready, it stopped and it receded back. And I watched it. So it was coming to me almost like moving slowly at the speed of light, is the way I describe it, is the way it was coming toward me. And then when I said, no, I'm not ready yet, it receded much more deliberately and slowly, as opposed to a very fast thing. It was a very slow recession, in which, and that whole experience shocked me because that was the whole point of me starting this. And so I felt very disappointed, like, why the hell did you do that? That's what you wanted. And then there's been other experiences involving Ian with some of my journeys where there was somewhat of a connection there. Not necessarily a direct communication with his entity, but some kind of presence that I don't know what the presence was, but there was a feeling. One was with ayahuasca, and I felt like almost like I was in his body, for a little bit. It was really a strange feeling.
Okay.
And then one other, I don't know if I can say this publicly. So somebody who knows all about survival of consciousness, I was having a talk with this person, and just a general talk about consciousness and what they study. And at the end of the conversation, he abruptly said, basically, I have something to tell you. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, you can see your son again. You can communicate with your son. And he said, you just have to be ready, because until you're ready, his presence will overwhelm your brain. So he has to know that you're ready, and when you're ready, he will show up. So that's kind of been my experiences with psychedelics and with talking to certain people, and my understanding. So I guess that's my answer, is maybe a little bit, but not completely.
So how long ago was that was said to you?
That was said to me maybe a year ago.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, when we first talked, this was just such a persistent question. So my question to you is, if you're open to it, we can certainly work on that. So I've had clients, people work with hypnosis, people who've never even done medicines, because you can use hypnosis it's just a way to get into this deeply relaxed state where we're open and surrender to what's possible, to communicating with that deeper part of ourselves. And I had an old family friend whose mother passed away, and she connected with him and it was in her sleep. But this is great because it's when we're in a state of full surrender too, in our sleep. And it's, yeah. I mean, we've heard about this for years and years, people connecting with loved ones, they show up for them in their dreams. And my dad did for me. It was funny actually, because he showed up and it was so real. Like I could feel his skin through his t-shirt as I hugged him. It was just all of these like little details were so physical, so real. And I was so excited, and he was trying to tell me something, and I was too excited to listen, and I'm like, oh my God, you're really here. Oh my God, this feels so good. Blah, blah, blah. And he kept saying, we got to go and talk, and I just kept freaking out in a happy way. And then I woke up the next morning and went, oh shit, I blew it. He was trying to tell me something and I missed it. So I went in the next night and I got the message without him. But yeah, because they could tell that I was just too distracted by the fact that it was so real and he was there and I could be with him, that I couldn't get the message because I just wanted to be with him,
Yeah. Did he come back and deliver the message to you, or did he leave the message for you to find it?
No, my guides delivered it in other ways. Like it presented itself in other ways. But the thing is that I think I needed that. I needed to hug him. I needed to connect with him and feel his happy presence and know that he's fine. Same thing is true of my old family friend. She needed to, and there's guilt, like when people die, when they're, all kinds of circumstances, there's so much guilt around it and so much really deep, hard feelings around it. We feel like we should really be able to, save our loved ones, but this goes back to the self-responsibility and something that we're still, we're finding our feet with, right? So she had concerns about the choices she made for her mom, when she was ailing. And anyway, we worked together with hypnosis, and finally, and we talked about this, opening up before she went to sleep in her dreams, to ask to see her mom. And her mom did show up, and she said, I knew it was her. I knew she was fine, and I feel much better, because she was just grieving. And, it takes over your life, and it's there in varying degrees in different ways. And yeah, so it's possible. And I think there's a reason why it was just like really persistent in my head when we first spoke. So if you're open to it, and feel out how you feel too,
Yeah, we should explore that. I know my wife has explored that with different people without any significant results. So I know we're both open to looking at that. So afterwards, let's talk.
Yeah, let's do that. And just for everybody else to know, I mean, a lot of this stuff may seem terribly esoteric, but I think that we have all heard at one point or another that we only use this small part of our brain. Well, guess what? We're using more of it. We're learning how to do that, and it is possible. And I guess it shouldn't be surprising to us that when we start to do that, we discover just how much more capable we are of connecting deeply, of one of the things this voice always teaches me about the importance of our thoughts is that they're not as opaque to others as we might think. There is a certain conscious level that we're mostly operating on where we believe that we can't pick up on those things with one another, but we do feel it, and they do have impact with one another. And so it's important to be aware of that, and then to harness the power of it for good. Be aware of what you're focusing on and your feelings attached to that. There's a lot to be
absolutely. Well, that's a great lesson, and so many great lessons in all this, Rebecca. I just can't tell you how grateful I am that you came on and shared your story from depression through Iboga and ayahuasca, and the fact that ayahuasca is still with you, and how you've really tapped into this consciousness. So wonderful. Thank you so much for coming and sharing.
And thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Yeah, my pleasure.
That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy, and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening, and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.